Today is July 12. It's 9 a.m. here in Vietnam. The morning rush is slowly coming to an end. The roads are still busy, but no longer crowded. Most office workers have already arrived. Factories are running at full speed. Schools have started their first classes, and the city is beginning to settle into its normal rhythm. As I drive through these familiar streets, I realize something. This road has changed more in the last 10 years than it did in the previous 30. When I was younger, I remember seeing endless strings of motorbikes, families of for riding together, workers carrying heavy bags, farmers bringing vegetables into the city before sunrise. Back then, a family car was something you didn't see very often. Owning one was a dream for many people. Today, that same road looks completely different. Cars move alongside motorbikes. Electric vehicles quietly pass by. New apartment buildings stand where rice fields once stretched toward the horizon. Coffee shops occupy corners that used to be empty land, and every few months another new business seems to appear. Sometimes I wonder if visitors who come here today realize just how quickly all of this happened. Many people outside Vietnam still imagine the country the way it looked 20 or 30 years ago. Picture bicycle sold streets and endless rows of motorbikes. Those things still exist, but they are no longer the whole story. Vietnam today is changing almost too quickly to describe it. What surprises me the most isn't how much has changed, it's how much has stayed the same. As I stop at another traffic light, I look around. To my left is a brand new electric SUV. To my right, an elderly woman is riding a bicycle with flowers tied carefully to the back. Behind me, a delivery rider is carrying breakfast across the city. In front of me, a young family is driving to a shopping mall in their first car, while their little daughter watches the world through the window with a smile. For completely different picture, sharing the same road at the same moment. That's what modern Vietnam feels like. Old and new moving forward together, never completely replacing the era. A few months ago, I read a comment from someone in Canada who had visited Vietnam for the first time in almost 15 years. Wrote that he expected to see the same country he remembered. Instead, he arrived at an airport that felt brand new. Drove on highways that didn't exist during his last visit. He saw electric buses, modern bridges, growing skylines, and neighborhoods filled with young familiars. Then he ended his comment with a sentence that stayed with me. He said Vietnam wasn't becoming another country, it was becoming a newer version of itself. I think that's a beautiful way to describe what is happening here, because despite all the new buildings, new technology, the growing economy, and the changing skyline, people still begin their mornings the same way. Small coffee shops are already serving familiar fast. Street vendors are preparing fresh fruit. Construction workers are sharing breakfast before another long day. Parents are taking their children to school. Grandparents are walking through neighborhood parks. Life continues to move at its own pace and not fast enough. To forget the past and not slow enough to stop dreaming about the future. Perhaps that's why Vietnam feels so different to many foreigners. It isn't just the speed of development that surprises them, it's the Balenciaga luxury apartment standing beside a family-owned noodle shop, a modern electric car waiting at a traffic light next to a man selling flowers from his bicycle, a young engineer buying coffee from the same elderly woman who has opened her small stand every morning for decades. These aren't contradictions. They're simply everyday life. As I continued driving through the city this morning, I realize that if someone asked me to describe Vietnam in one sentence, I probably wouldn't talk about the tallest building or the newest highway. The fastest growing industry would simply say this: Vietnam is a country that never stops moving, but somehow it never forgets where it came from. And maybe that's exactly why so many people who visit this country leave feeling like they have witnessed something special, not because Vietnam is trying to become someone else, but because it's becoming a better version of itself while still holding on to the things that make it feel like home. Today, I want to show you that journeying it through statistics, not through headlines, but through an ordinary drive on an ordinary Sunday morning. Back hours, sometimes the biggest changes can be seen on the roads we travel every single day. Asterisk. As I leave the city center behind, the road begins to open up. Traffic flows a little more smoothly. No cars move quietly alongside. Motorbike delivery truck passes on my left. An electric taxi glides by almost silently. A family in a small SUV waits patiently for pedestrians to cross. If someone had shown me this exact road 20 years ago, I probably wouldn't have believed it, not because Vietnam couldn't change, but because it changed much faster than most people expected. Only of the biggest surprises for many foreigners isn't that Vietnam is developing, it's how quickly everyday life adapts to those changes. A visitor who came here 15 years ago might remember narrow roads crowded almost entirely with motorbikes. Today, that same visitor returns to find modern expressways, new bridges, electric buses, and growing neighborhoods stretching far beyond the old city center. Yet somehow the streets still feel familiar. That's because Vietnam rarely replaces everything overnight. Instead, the new grows beside the old. As I stopped to let a group of students cross the street, I noticed something interesting. Almost every generation is represented in front of me. An elderly man rides a bicycle that looks older than many of the buildings around it. A university student unlocks an electric scooter with her phone. A young couple drives their first family car with a baby seat carefully installed in the back. A delivery rider carries packages for customers who ordered them only minutes ago. For generations, for different ways of moving, sharing the same road. Perhaps that's one of the reasons Vietnam feels so. Our every generation is helping shape the country in its own way. Remember talking with an Australian visitor who had spent several months traveling across Vietnam. He told me something that made me stop and think. Said that Vietnam reminded him of watching a time-lapse video every time he returned to the same place. Something had changed. A new cafe had opened, a new apartment building had appeared, a road that was under construction was suddenly complete. But the local woman selling breakfast on the corner was still there, smiling at everyone who walked past. That's when he realized development wasn't erasing daily life, it was growing around us. I continue driving. I pass a small traditional marketingly a few hundred meters away. A modern supermarket stands across the street. Some people choose one, some choose the other. Many visit, bought fresh vegetables from the market, household items from the supermarket, old habits and new conveniences existing together. That's something I admire about Vietnam. Progress here often feels practical rather than dramatic. People embrace new technology when it improves life, but they don't always abandon the traditions that still make sense. You can pay with your phone almost everywhere now, yet many people still stop every morning at the same coffee stand where the owner already knows exactly what they like to drink. Modern payment, traditional relationships both can exist at the same time. As the road carries me farther toward the edge of the city, I see another example. On one side, there are factories producing products that will be shipped around the world. On the other side, farmers are tending small vegetable fields that have been part of this community for generations. Some people might see a contrast. I see a country learning how to grow without forgetting where it began. Of course, Vietnam still faces challenges. Traffic can be vicissitudes continue to expand, and balancing rapid development with tradition is never easy. But that's exactly why this journey is so fascinating to watch. Because the story of modern Vietnam isn't only about bigger buildings or newer cars. It's about millions of ordinary people adapting one day at a time. A teacher learning new technology, a small business accepting digital payments, a young engineer returning to his hometown on weekends to visit his parents, a grandmother making video calls to grandchildren who study in another city. These aren't dramatic changes, but together they are quietly transforming everyday life. I drive under the shade of newly planted trees lining this wide boulevard. I can't help but Smith Road ahead looks very different from the one I remember as a child, yet the feeling is strangely familiar. People are still working hard, still greeting one another, still stopping for coffee, still building a better future for the next generation. Maybe that's the real story hidden behind all this change. Vietnam isn't racing to leave its past behind. It's carrying its past forward while making room for the future. And perhaps that's why every drive through this country feels like driving through two different eras at the same time, reminding us where Vietnam came from, the other quietly showing us where it's going. Asterisk. As the road stretches farther ahead, I begin thinking about something I've heard many times from people who have visited Vietnam. They often say that Vietnam isn't the Country they expected many arrive with an image that was formed years. Agasum imagine endless rice fields. Imagine crowded streets filled only with motorbikes. Others expect a country that is still slowly catching up with the rest of the world. Then they arrive and almost immediately they realize how quickly things have changed. Remember reading a story from a traveler in France who returned to Vietnam after more than 10 years. Said the first surprise came before he even left the airport. Roads were wider, traffic was more organized than he remembered. New bridges connected parts of the city that once felt far apart. Modern apartment buildings stood where open land had once existed. Told his friends that it felt like visiting to different countries. Vietnam, he remembered Dan the Vietnam standing in front of him today. But what impressed him the most wasn't the skyline, it was the people. Expected rapid development to change the way people treated each other. Instead, he still found small coffee shops where customers greeted the owner by name. He still found families eating together in the evening. Still found neighbors sitting outside, talking after sunset. Buildings had changed, roads had changed, but the feeling hadn't. That's something I hear again and again. A visitor from Canada once described Vietnam in a way I had never thought about before. He said Vietnam doesn't feel like a country trying to become someone else. It feels like a country becoming more confident in who it already is. Think about those words every time I drive through streets like this, because round me I can see the future arriving little by little. Electric vehicles are becoming more common. Digital payments have become part of everyday life. People order food, groceries, and transportation with their phones. Young engineers work for global technology companies without leaving their hometowns. Factories across northern Vietnam produce products that will soon be used in homes across Europe, America, and Asia. At only a few minutes away from those factories, you'll still find someone making fresh noodles the same way their parents and grandparents did. Perhaps that's what makes Vietnam so fascinating. It doesn't feel like the old is disappearing. It feels like the old and the new are learning how to live together. As I stop beside another intersection, I notice a modern electric SUV waiting next to an elderly man selling lotus flowers from his bicycle. Neither one looks out of place. In many countries, people talk about choosing between tradition and progress. Here they often exist side by side, and maybe that's why change feels less frightening, because people don't have to give up everything familiar in order to move forward. Sometimes I imagine what this same road will look like 10 years from now. There will probably be more electric cars, smarter traffic systems, new apartment towers, maybe even technologies we can't imagine today. But I also hope you'll still see the woman selling sticky rice every morning, old man reading his newspaper outside the coffee shop, children stopping to buy snacks after school. Those simple scenes remind us that development isn't only about building something new, it's also about protecting the things that already make life Meaningful as I continue my drive, I realize something when people around the world talk about Vietnam. They often focus on how fast the country is growing, but growth isn't the whole story. The real story is how millions of ordinary people continue to shape this country every single day. Teachers helping the next generation, factory workers building products used around the world, small business owners opening their shops before sunrise, farmers bringing fresh food into the cities every morning, families supporting one another through changing times. None of them appear on magazine covers yet. Together they are writing one of the most remarkable chapters in Vietnam's modern history. Maybe that's why I enjoy these morning drives so much, because every road reminds me that the biggest changes aren't always found in the tallest buildings. Sometimes they're found in the ordinary lives of ordinary people, quietly moving forward in day at a time. As my drive this morning slowly comes to an end, I begin thinking about how much Vietnam has changed during my lifetime. Some changes happened so quickly that many of us hardly notice them. New roads appeared, new businesses open, modern apartment buildings rose across cities that once looked completely different. Electric vehicles became part of everyday life. Technology changed the way we work, travel, and communicate. Every morning I still see the same familiar moments: a grandmother buying fresh vegetables before returning home, parents walking their children into school, friends meeting over coffee before work, street vendors greeting customers they have known for years. These simple moments remind me that the true identity of a country isn't built only through economic growth, it's built through the habits, values, and relationships that people choose to protect. Perhaps that's why so many foreigners leave Vietnam with memories they never expected. They remember the kindness of strangers, conversations that happen so naturally over a cup of coffee, neighborhoods that still feel connected, and the feeling that life here is shared instead of lived. No country stays the same forever. Vietnam certainly won't. In years from now, these roads will probably look different again. There will be more technology, more electric cars, more modern buildings, but I hope one thing never changes. I hope Vietnam continues to grow without losing the warmth that makes everyday life here so special. Because in the end, the future of a country isn't only measured by what it builds, it's measured by what it chooses to keep. Thank you for joining me on another drive through Vietnam. This is Inside Vietnam, and tomorrow we'll discover another ordinary story hidden in everyday life.